How does potentially adding the Big Ten sack leader sound for 2024? Plus, should Missouri let Luther Burton return punts next season? And a little bit of basketball, too, coming up right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hail, you true sons and daughters. I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And am I a little hot here? Let me turn myself down just a tiny bit. I'm hearing a little bit of crackling in my earphones. That's why you put these babies on, folks. It's not because they look good on my head. I hate to obscure my face for the ladies out there in any way, but it's just part of being a professional broadcaster. What can I say? But you know what? In all seriousness, folks, some really exciting potential news for the Missouri football team. Once again, we've had a lot of it here this offseason. Of course, an absolutely thrilling 2023 season. Almost doesn't even feel like it covers it at this point. But of course, the Tigers are going all in 2024. You're returning your starting quarterback, Luther Burton, who of course I brought up in the A block here, and hopefully Nic Scourton, formerly known as Nick Carraway when he was in high school, by the way. Well, Nic Scourton is the Big Ten's sack leader this past season with 10 sacks on the season, and he's going to be in Columbia reportedly on Friday. He's also taking visits to Texas A&M, Florida State, and Oklahoma as well. So a lot of big names there, as you might expect, after that young man who entered the transfer portal. One thing I liked seeing is that Nic Scourton, his 10 sacks were spread over multiple games, including a couple sacks against Michigan and one against Ohio State as well. Really, since maybe Trajan Jeffcoat, the season he had 6 sacks, and people were expecting maybe an even bigger breakout the next season. One thing to note in that season is he did get 3 of his sacks, half of his total in just one game. So I don't know. Ever since then, I kind of like to see him spread out a little bit. Obviously, when you get 10, you're probably not going to get 5 in one game, obviously. But it's 6'4", 280 pounds. He's a rather large edge rusher, to say the least. And if Missouri is able to wrestle away Nic Scourton from Purdue, again, the Big Ten's sack leader on next year's roster, man, what a coup that would be for Eli Drinkwitz and company. No doubt about that. And also, well, Missouri did add running back Marcus Carroll from the transfer portal. Well, another running back visiting, this one from Eli Drinkwitz's old stomping grounds of Appalachian State. Similar size, by the way, to Carroll and Cody Schrader. Nate Noel from App State. By the way, Marcus Carroll, what was his college? Was it Georgia State or Georgia Southern? Georgia State. There we go. That's what I was trying to check on there really quickly. I thought that was correct, but just wanted to make sure I didn't need to issue another correction on the next episode. But obviously, with Marcus Carroll in the fold, one of the nation's leading rushers last year at over 1,300 yards, you might have thought Missouri is set at this spot. But at the very least, they're kicking the tires on Nate Noel, and all indications are it's not as though the teams after Nate Noel are the caliber that are after Nic Scourton. It's not A&M, Florida State, and Oklahoma. So I think if Missouri, if it all goes well on the visit, they decide they want to add more running back depth, well, there you go. And I think that makes more sense now that Marcus Carroll is in the fold. Again, Eli Drinkwitz, we all know this, right? He tends to pick a running back and go with one. Cody Schrader the past couple seasons. Before that, of course, Tyler Beatty and Larry Roundtree here at Missouri had by far the Lions and Tigers share of the load of the carries in every season with Drinkwitz. So in year 5 in 2024, I don't really have any reason to doubt that that's going to be the case as well. It seems like I would bet a lot of money is what I'm saying that Marcus Carroll ends up with a heck of a lot of carries next year for the Tigers. But speaking of next season, one thing we know that's not happening next season, we won't be seeing Jalen Carlies, a.k.a. J.C. Carlies, in the back end of the defense at free safety anymore. And honestly, I thought this was his best season as a Tiger by a pretty good margin because quite candidly, I thought at times last season in 2022, I thought Carlies kind of hurt Missouri in coverage. But this season, I didn't really feel that way very often. Maybe once or twice I can think of times where he got beat in coverage, but guess what? That's going to happen to everybody. The previous season, I thought at times, again, I hate to be this candid kind of, but I thought he was a bit of a liability in coverage. So to me, if he's able to improve on his coverage, as it sure seemed like he did this season to me, well, he's got all of the physical tools and size you could want at that position. So I do think he's a draftable player for sure, along with Cody Schrader, Darius Robinson, Ennis Rakestraw, Chris Abrams-Drain. I mean, there's 5 guys right off the top of my head. Certainly Javon Foster, I think, is a draftable player as well. There's a 6th guy. You know, there could be some other guys that I'm not even thinking of. I didn't even know that I was going to be talking about this topic. I didn't prep for it. My point is, it just goes to show you that, wow, the talent on last year's team obviously met the record. It wasn't a fluke whatsoever. That Missouri, really the fluke was 2022, if anything. And you know what? Since I didn't get a chance to talk about the college football playoff semifinal games, I have to say that the Michigan-Alabama game and the Washington-Texas game, well, I had the correct side on both of those. Played out about as I expected. I just had a lot more belief in the Michigan quarterback, J.J. McCarthy, than I did in Jalen Milroe, number one, and also just on paper, statistically, Michigan was by far the better team than Alabama. That's not to say that this wasn't a good Alabama team, of course, but just not quite up to the par of teams of Alabama's past. And I think, well, we saw that play out. A lot of it was, I think, the quarterback position in some ways was really the difference. But, of course, Michael Penix, he's another story. He's playing really great football right now, as everybody can see. And obviously, I think that's going to be a great football game. I'm still favoring Michigan, though, just like they're favored over at FanDuel Sportsbook right now by 4.5 points. I just think you got to go with the Wolverines. I've thought really they're the best team all season, other than maybe Georgia. And, well, Georgia is not in this tournament. I really thought it was going to be Michigan and Georgia, but when Georgia got upset by Alabama, I've just thought the whole way this is going to be Michigan's year, whether you like it or not, because I know that's gonna make a lot of people upset for sure, and possibly for good reason. But of course, hopefully Missouri is in next year's inaugural version of the 12-team college football playoff. And if we're going to get there, well, obviously there's some things Missouri needs to improve on from last season. Part of that calculus to me is Missouri and its coaching staff should be asking itself, should Luther Burton III be the punt returner next season for the Tigers? I want to get into that topic coming up here in just a little bit. But first, let's talk about LinkedIn Jobs, because at the start of the new year, every small business owner is asking themselves the same question. What's the one move I can make that'll take my business to the next level in the new year? Well, LinkedIn Jobs knows that your success depends on the team you surround yourself with. That's why LinkedIn Jobs has created the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. And as a small business owner, I can tell you Once you find those right candidates, they make your life so much better. One of the best trade-offs you're ever going to make, in fact, is giving those people their hard-earned money. And you know what? It's why small business owners rate LinkedIn Jobs number one in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Thanks, as per usual, for making Locked On Mizzou your first listen every day. And now for your second listen, I suggest checking out Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribing to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. That's Locked On Sports Today, again, on the good old YouTube. But you know what? Let's talk about Luther Burton III, because he was a little bit shaky back there in punt returns in the Cotton Bowl. Let's be honest. I don't know if the lighting was bad or what, but unfortunately, it seemed like Luther was a little bit hesitant to field the ball, and that caused Missouri to make a change in the second half. Chris Abrams-Drain was back there returning punts for Missouri. Now, I'm not on the Missouri sidelines. Maybe there was something going on other than what we saw in the field there. Who knows? But it does bring up a couple decent questions, I think, when it comes to Luther Burton being the primary Missouri punt returner. Number one, is it worth the risk in terms of injury? Because, well, gosh, we saw speaking of, I talked about the Michigan and Alabama game, of course. Man, we saw some punt returners getting lit up in that game, didn't we? Well, that's a real dangerous position, and considering how important Luther Burton is going to be to Missouri's success next season, listen, if they're gonna reach their goal, and I assume this is their goal of making the college football playoff next season or winning the SEC, whatever it might be, they're going to need Luther Burton playing 90% of the season. Let's put it that way. And I just think putting him back there at a punt returner at this point, it's at least worth asking, is this worth the risk? I'm not so sure that it is. Well, there's also another question. Is he actually good at being a punt returner? Well, we need a little bit of context here to answer that question, don't we? We can't just analyze him and not pay attention to the rest of the country. Well, this past season, a lot of fair catches for Luther, and for the most part, I think he did a good job of catching the ball this season. So perhaps the Cotton Bowl was just a bit of an outlier. But on the balls that he did actually return, 7 returns on the season for 60 yards. That's an 8.5 yard average per return with a long of 17 yards. And you know what? That's actually those 7 returns. That means that Luther didn't actually qualify to being one of the top 50 in terms of statistics and punt returns. But if he did qualify, well, actually that would put him 26th in the country, which is pretty darn good. 26th out of 130 some odd main punt returners, whatever it might be. But again, only 50 actually qualified. Still, though, that's a pretty good number. That shows it's probably worth putting most players back there. But again, Luther Burton III is not most players. He's a heck of a lot more valuable than that. But again, if he's sort of middling there, then I'll be honest, I didn't compare him to the rest of the Southeastern Conference, just qualified players in FBS football. But again, is that game-breaking enough of a player when you factor in the risk of injury and his ability to catch the ball cleanly and safely? Because a lot of times Burton does like to actually field the ball off of the ground. We saw this multiple times. Go back and watch his high school highlights. You'll see over and over again him making big-time game-changing plays in the punt game, but more often than not on those plays, he's catching that ball off the ground. It's bouncing a time or two, and he's, fielding it like a shortstop or something, and then taking off around the edge and often going 85 yards for a touchdown rather impressively. Listen, that stuff works great in high school. I just worry that at a certain point, he's going to have a muff at a really, really bad time, just like Michigan did in that game against Alabama that nearly cost them that football game. I don't have the muff stats in front of me. Muff stats. I don't have the muff stats in front of me, but again, he tends to let the ball hit the ground more than I'm comfortable with. Again, back in my mind, before the Cotton Bowl, it seemed like Luther had done a good job of catching the ball. But there is also one other factor. What are Missouri's other options in terms of punt returner next season? Maybe Luther really is, if he's truly the safest guy to go back there and catch it, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe statistically he's done a great job at it. Missouri feels comfortable there. If that's true, and really he only had 7 actual returns this past season, well, maybe it is worth it then. If he's not going to return it that much and he's going to be fairly conservative back there, then okay, I'm actually all right with it. At the same time, what are our other options? My first thought was Marquise Johnson. Has he ever returned a punt before? We know he's been on the kickoff return team this past season, but could Speedy get back there and maybe return punts as well? I'd certainly at least like to try it out in spring football and see how it looks. Him along with several other guys, anybody out there who wants a shot at it, I'd give him a shot. But to me, Marquise Johnson's the one guy that I'd be going, let's see how Speedy can do this, because not only has he earned that name Speedy, from what I can tell, he's really good at tracking deep footballs in the air. It sure seems like that particular skill would translate nicely to the punt return game as well. And by the way, since Missouri's goal next season is the college football playoff, well, I should clear up what seems to be some slight confusion online about the new format. Of course, the top 4 teams will get a first round bye. The next 8 teams will then square off on the home campus of the 5 through 8 seeds. So Missouri could potentially host a home college football playoff game at Faurot Field next year. If that doesn't get you excited, I'm not really sure what would, because quite honestly, that would be the biggest event in the history of Missouri sports, possibly in the history of Columbia, maybe other than the Rolling Stones concert back in 1994 or something like that. You know what? I'm still going with the college football playoff game in that one. But just again, clear up some confusion. If you are one of those 5 through 8 teams, or again, the 5 through 12, well, if you lose in that first round game, got me thinking, yes, there won't be a bowl game for you. Some people are saying, hey, are those going to be bowl games too? Since in this current format that we have, obviously, for instance, Michigan and Alabama just played in the Rose Bowl, won a semifinal playoff game, get to hoist a Rose Bowl trophy, and all that good stuff. Well, that's not going to be happening in the first round of the college football playoff next year. Will it happen in the quarterfinals? I'm not so sure. Perhaps those are, I have to admit off the top of my head, I feel like some of those games, the New Year's 6 games are probably going to be factored in there. So we'll see exactly how all of that shapes out. But I do know this, if indeed there is a game at Missouri next season, unfortunately, no Pop-Tart Bowl will be forthcoming. No edible mascots or anything like that, much to all of our chagrins. But in all seriousness, that would be the biggest event of all time. Frankly, a bunch of corporate sponsorship and bowl this and Citrus Bowl that nonsense would sort of be an unnecessary distraction, in my humble opinion. And you know what? I do want to talk some basketball and reset a little bit, because obviously this has been a bit of a disappointing start for Dennis Gates and his team so far. But when you actually look at the SEC as a whole, which once again is one of the best leagues in the country, well, Missouri actually stacks up a little bit better than you might be expecting. So let's talk about that here in just a little bit. But first, let's talk about a FanDuel, because the NFL regular season is wrapping up, but there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is so easy to use, and there's so many different ways to bet, including same-game parlays. Find also new bets in the new Explore tab and make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, the best way to find popular parlays. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. It's FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. So looking at the SEC in terms of basketball so far this season, again, at least so far, we're about a third of the way through the actual schedule here of college basketball. I think there's 5 teams that stand out above the rest. And, well, speaking of FanDuel Sportsbook, they agree with me there in terms of odds to win the SEC. I think Alabama, Tennessee, Auburn, Kentucky, and Texas A&M really have stood out above everyone else so far. Alabama so far has the best offense in the country, though their defense is a little bit lacking. This is according to KenPom.com, their efficiency numbers. So the Crimson Tide, maybe a bit like the 2012 Missouri Tigers a little bit, which is obviously not a bad thing despite Missouri flaming out in the first round of the tournament. But again, that flame out, to my point, more often than not, I'm going to lean on teams in March Madness that play defense, and that's the Tennessee Volunteers. They have one of, if not the best defenses in the entire country. And again, well, FanDuel appears to agree with me, having Tennessee as the odds-on favorite to win the league right now. But I think those top 5 teams, really, I think Texas A&M is clearly the 5th team of that equation, but really any of those top 4, meaning Alabama, Tennessee, Auburn, and Kentucky, could win the league, in my opinion. Then you've got Florida and Mississippi State, who statistically would be in the tournament right now, but just based on their resume, they still have a lot left to prove to me. Then you just kind of get into this big quagmire of teams like Ole Miss, LSU, South Carolina, and yes, Missouri and Georgia, who play each other this weekend. But surprisingly enough to me, well, Arkansas is a member of that class right now as well. A lot of times, Eric Musselman's teams definitely do improve as the season goes along, and it seems like he's gone much more portal heavy, sort of as was his usual modus operandi for most of his career until last season, when he got a lot of real blue chip type of freshman players out of high school to go along with Trevin Brazile, of course, the transfer from Missouri. But I don't know. Arkansas, I'm just not sure if they quite have it this year, although FanDuel giving them real good odds to win the league still at 16-1. Missouri at 40-1. Really, that's better than I would have expected considering how Missouri has played so far. Not telling you to bet on Missouri to win the SEC whatsoever. In fact, that top 5, I don't really see any way Missouri breaks into that top 5. Certainly not the top 4. I just don't think that's their upside right now. However, do I think Missouri could be the 6th or 7th best team in a league that I expect to get 6 or 7 bids? Yeah, I think it's possible. Am I betting on that? No, I'm not. Not with even money. If you're going to give me 10-1, yeah, to make the tournament, absolutely, I'll take it. That type of deal. Even 5-1 I would consider for sure. 10-1 silly. I'm just making a point there. I'm just saying, if you're a Missouri fan that's decided to give up on the season at this point, I still just feel like there's a few tweaks here and there from Missouri being a better team than it's been so far. I do agree with the people who said that, well, Missouri missed some guys in the portal, maybe missed on some guys that are at other places that would have been really helpful, unfortunately, and maybe we just were the silver medalist in those particular cases, for which truly second is as good as last in recruiting in some ways, in that, well, you didn't actually get anything out of it. But I just think long-term, obviously this program is fine, and even this is a season at this point that I'm not giving up on whatsoever. I just feel like there's still potential for some of these freshmen to maybe a light to go on for Trent Pierce, something like that. Maybe Connor Vanover, again, just playing him near the basket more, makes him a more efficient and effective player in 15 to 20 minutes a night. And honestly, Noah Carter's going to start hitting some shots at some point. If this were an NBA season, you'd think, he's just gone through a little bit of a slump. The stuff happens, but in a college season, it's so much more condensed. I think we have a tendency to maybe overanalyze things a little bit, and I think Noah Carter's going to settle in here during SEC play. That's my prediction coming up. But you know what? Thanks for settling in and listening to another edition of Locked On Mizzou. Thanks for making this show your first listen every day. And once again, check out Locked On Sports today for your second listen on YouTube, and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. And you know what? Coming up this week on Locked On Mizzou, I kind of hinted at this a little bit earlier. Hey, Missouri, if they got, say, a 5 seed, the 5 through 8, obviously the biggest event in Missouri sports history. Well, as a fan, hey, hypothetically speaking, is it actually worth it to have that game if you're the 5 seed at home playing against potentially a group of 5 team that you'd be maybe a 10-point favorite against, something like that? Would it be worth it to have that instead of being the 4 seed and getting a bye? Well, chew on that. We'll talk about that sometime this week, coming up right here on Locked On Mizzou.